Hello, this is an experiment where I talk about stories, fiction, books, and so forth, and do little reviews. I thought I'd begin by just talking about a story I already know very well and I've read many times and see how it goes. This is The Flowering of the Strange Orchid by H.G. Wells, which was published over 100 years ago and is quite rightly seen as a bit of a classic of horror fiction. Also an oddity in that it's a story about a plant rather than a creature or a human being. And it's also an interesting example of what they call Empire Gothic. I'm a huge fan of H.G. Wells. I love his work. And this is a classic example of how good a short storyteller he was. It's a very simple tale. It's a tale of a man called Mr. Winter Wedderburn, who is a very ineffectual, small, nervous character who doesn't have a job because he's got a private income, like a lot of gentlemen in short stories of this kind. He lives alone except for his housekeeper, who is described as a cousin, which is interesting because H.G. Wells, around the time he wrote this, was married to his cousin, whom he later divorced. But we'll leave that aside. He also has a gardener, so he's reasonably prosperous. In fact, in some respects, he's rather like the protagonists of the ghost stories of M.R. James, who have nice, comfortable incomes. But unlike those men, who very often have all sorts of pursuits to keep them out and about in the world and busy, so they go off and do archaeology or antiquarian stuff, or they belong to learned societies and sit on committees. Wedderburn is very ineffectual indeed and doesn't do anything. He longs, in theory, for an exciting life, but the only thing he really does is collect and try to grow orchids. He's not really very good at that either, it emerges. And at one point he says, "Nothing ever happens to me. I wonder why. Things enough happen to other people. There is Harvey. Only the other week, on Monday, he picked up a sixpence. On Wednesday, his chicks all had the staggers. On Friday, his cousin came home from Australia, and on Saturday, he broke his ankle. What a whirl of excitement compared to me." So, a guy who has some sick chickens and a broken ankle is, to Wedderburn, basically John Wick. So, it's a very, very quiet life. But and this is where Empire Gothic stuff works. I think my hand looks enormous there, never mind. This is where the Empire Gothic thing comes in. Empire Gothic is all about the zenith of the British Empire in the late Victorian and Edwardian eras and how much more powerful Britain was than any other country, theoretically, at the time. And yet, how fragile that power seemed in the face of weird foreign threats, sometimes of a supernatural nature in fiction, sometimes of a more straightforward, practical, somebody's trying to kill you nature, as in the stories of Fu Manchu by Sax Rohmer. In this case, the Empire Gothic element comes from collecting orchids, which you think would be fairly innocuous. But then Wedderburn goes on to explain to his cousin where the orchid he hopes to buy, or the orchids he hopes to buy, came from. He said, "That orchid collector was only 36, 20 years younger than me when he died, and he'd been married twice, divorced once. He'd had malarial fever 4 times, and once he broke his thigh." Breaking bones seems to be seen as the zenith of pinnacle of entertainment here. Point is, the guy was found dead in the jungle with this orchid clutched underneath him, the strange orchid of an unknown species. Wedderburn buys it. He buys several orchids, puts them in his greenhouse. Most of them die, but the strange orchid, the species he can't identify, grows. His cousin, who is a sensible woman, sees this thing, and it has weird sort of tendrils growing out of it. Aerial rootlets, as they're called. Spoiler alert. There's lots of spoilers in this. Yeah, and essentially the orchid grows and grows and grows, and then eventually it flowers. And when it flowers, what happens is that Wedderburn is delighted. He goes into his little greenhouse. It's emphasised that it's small and, of course, very hot and humid. And the scent from the orchid is quite wonderful. Naturally, he goes close to examine it, so close that the scent, concentrated odour of this thing is so powerful that it overwhelms him and he collapses. Massive spoiler again. And then his cousin misses him at tea time. She makes the tea and he doesn't turn up. So, of course, naturally, she says, "Oh, where is he? He's pouncing about with his orchids again." She goes to the greenhouse, opens the door, and the scent is tremendously strong. So strong it's heady and it makes her feel slightly woozy. She rushes in and sees him. She sees the full Empire Gothic thing. This South American orchid, I should have mentioned, it's from Brazil, has got him. He's collapsed as a result of what I suppose you could call chemical warfare. He's been knocked out by its odour, and it's got tendrils, aerial rootlets as they're called, fastened all over the exposed parts of his face and hands, and it's sucking his blood out. And this leads naturally to a bit of panic on behalf of the cousin. She tries very hard to sort of get the thing off, but then she realizes she is about to collapse as well. So she sensibly rushes outside, picks up a plant pot, and smashes the greenhouse window. She demonstrates far more presence of mind and courage than her idiot cousin. Then she drags him outside and tears off these suckers one by one. And the gardener appears rather belatedly. She tells him to go and get the doctor, and Winter Wedderburn is rescued. And the orchid rots and dies, and it's sort of the last vestiges of life in it are some twitching tendrils, which Lovecraft must have noticed. And it said Wedderburn had lost a good deal of blood, but beyond that, he had suffered no very great injury. They gave him brandy mixed with some pink extract of meat and carried him upstairs to bed. Yes. The next morning, the strange orchid still lay there, black now and putrescent. The door banged incessantly in the morning breeze, and all the array of Wedderburn's orchids was shrivelled and prostrate. But Wedderburn himself was bright and garrulous upstairs in the glory of his strange adventure. So now he is the Indiana Jones of suburbia. He's actually faced this terrifying threat and survived, except, of course, he didn't do anything except nearly get himself killed. It's a lovely little story. I would recommend it to anyone. It's been collected quite a few times. Lovecraft, as I say, praised it highly. He doesn't seem to have been a massive fan of Wells, but he certainly praised this one. And it's a good example of proto-science fiction, and as I say, Empire Gothic. It's very different from other Empire Gothic stories like Dracula, of course, but the principle is the same. That there is a serene, comfortable, easygoing, secure world here in England, and out there is a terrifying threat of some kind, and inevitably one collides with the other. Other examples of Empire Gothic, you find them in Sherlock Holmes, The Sign of the Four, and the Sussex Vampire, kind of, I think. And Richard Marsh's neglected novel, The Beetle, is well worth seeking out if you're looking for more of that kind of thing. A very strange book. But anyway, that's my little mini review, if you like, or chit-chat piece about The Flowering of the Strange Orchid by H.G. Wells, a short story writer everybody should know, and indeed a novelist everybody should read, I think. That's my opinion. And I will be back soon with more chat about books, if I'm spared. It's the Christmas season, you never know.